So what can be done? Lord Hennessy is here, and listening to all of this from our studios in Salford is the former American talk show host Charlie Wolf. First of all, though, to you, Peter Hennessy, I mean, President Obama clearly distressed, as anyone would be, hinted that America has to do more to protect children, but what has he got in terms of power to introduce new gun laws?
It's one of the great paradoxes of American politics that the single most powerful person in the world cannot prevail very often in their own country. And the problem with this particular question is the National Rifle Association is one of the most effective pressure groups in the world. The Second Amendment of the Constitution, as we've already heard, enshrines the right to bear arms. And it's deep, instinctive within many of the American people. And I remember I first visited the United States in July 1968, just after Bobby Kennedy and Martin Luther King had been assassinated. And there on the television was Senator Abe Rivikoff of Connecticut calling for gun law control to be tightened up. There is, many of the states have got it, but the federal provisions are very inadequate. And as somebody who really loves the United States, as I do, it's unbearable to see these tragedies. Well, it's unbearable for anybody. But the paralysis within the American system is such, and the constitutional enshrinement is such, that it's going to make it very, very difficult for even this most persuasive of presidents, on the back of this unspeakable tragedy, to shift the moving parts in such a way that something better might emerge.
Right. I mean, Charlie Wolf, you know, the numbers speak for themselves. There have been something like 62 mass killings since the 1980s. Tens of thousands of Americans are killed by guns every year. However powerful the gun lobby is, surely new laws have to be brought in.
I don't think it's so much the gun lobby, by the way. I think that's a bit of a myth. The reason the NRA has the power that it has is because, again, it's a deep-rooted feeling, and it is a constitutional item. I'm not a gun owner, but I do very much support the Second Amendment, and I would not give up that liberty, not very quickly at all.
Why not?
Because it's in our system of checks and balances. This is one of the powers we have over the government. Power rests with the people. The Founding Fathers knew that self-defense and the right to bear arms was a natural law. So this is to us as important as the First Amendment and the right of religion and for separation of church and state and free speech, and the Fifth Amendment on not being able to self-incriminate and right of redress. These are all part and parcel of that power that holds natural powers endowed by our Creator, that we are endowed with by our Creator. So that's why it's so important.
Right, but Charlie Wolf, if though, in these situations like this, is there an acceptance that there will be, therefore, more killings of this sort of nature because guns are in American homes?
Not necessarily. I don't think the evidence supports that. I've been reading a study. I've just found it last night from the Harvard Law Review and Public Policy Review, which, by the way, I'll tweet to you folks so others can see it. And they say that this feeling that more guns equals more crime, the evidence doesn't support that. Matter of fact, it's interesting to note, of the last spate we've had, the last 9 or 12 gun incidents we've had, all but the one in Arizona where Gabby Giffords were shot, were all in areas that had no guns available. You know, there's no guns in a school, there's no guns in a theater. Connecticut has the 4th strongest gun laws in America.
But if they have the 4th strongest gun laws, then why was the home of Adam Lanza had so many guns in it, at least 6 guns, and cited a semi-automatic machine gun?
Well, first off, a semi-automatic is not a machine gun. Okay, that was not.
Well, you could go because I'm not an expert on guns, but it sounded pretty.
I know, none of us are, and that's part of the problem when we get into this conversation. We throw terms around, and I'm not an expert either, but it's not in the assault.
All right, but what about the main point that there were guns in that house?
Yes, she legally had the right to keep those. Now, I think it's agreed on all sides that you don't want to see the Adam Lanzas of the world getting guns, and I believe it was Colorado. The 2 sides came together and have worked on a plan that I think is what we should look at. It's not just banning guns or getting rid of guns. It's a 2-track system. On the one hand, you want to make sure that criminals, people that are not mentally stable, are getting guns. But at the same time, concomitantly with that, you want to ensure that responsible gun owners have their powers strengthened to make sure they can conceal and carry and protect themselves against these people.
Right, okay. I mean, how do you do that, though? I mean, that sounds to me like you need gun laws, even if it is to limit ownership, limit the sort of people that can actually have them, so that they are not regularly in your average American house.
Well, I certainly think so, and Charlie will know this better than me, but the federal provision is weak, which means that you can't keep guns out of states. It's free flow of people and movement of goods and so on in the United States. But the gun law at the federal level is inadequate. But on Charlie's constitutional point, we can hold our governments to account perfectly well in the United Kingdom without festooning ourselves with weapons. Most countries do not need weapons to hold their country to account, Charlie.
You have to understand our system and our history. We were under the cosh of your government, with all due respect, of King George III, and we had to fight a revolution to become free. And it is important that one of the reasons you see governments being held in power democratically is because the people have the power. I don't want to see a modern-day Nazi Germany. So it does happen. It is possible, even in modern history, for these things to happen. So it's important to the American people that we hold the power, that the power is vested. And again, it is a natural right of self-defense, and it's a feeling that we're responsible adults. I don't want to, because one or two people has violated the law.
Well, it's more than one or two, though.
Well, a very small percentage, obviously, compared to there's some 280 million guns in America, or gun owners. So it's still a very small percentage. School shootings represent less than 1% of all shooting homicides.
On that basis, though, Charlie, would you like more people to have guns? Perhaps if everybody could defend themselves, perhaps, you know, if there had been arms in the school, for example, would they have been able to defend themselves against this man? I think it's part of a conversation that should be had. I don't think every school has to be made into Fort Knox, into a fortress. You know, in all things you talk about a balance and an assessment of risk. And this place had security in place. They had a locked door policy. This man shot his way in through a glass door. So there does need to be a conversation. There also has to be a wider conversation about culture. For instance, over half of the top 25 gun incidents have all happened, I believe it's in the last 20 years. Something has changed in our culture. Right.
And in Western culture in general. And I think that has a lot to do with reality television, with the fact that these kids have no empathy anymore. You can blow someone up on Xbox and not think anything of it. So that's something that has to be examined in the wider picture.
Peter, is it difficult to combat if that is the deeply held belief of so many Americans, that to have this instinctive right? I mean, really, President Obama doesn't stand a chance if what he wants to do is change that.
Yes, he's running against feelings that have been powerful since the 18th century, as Charlie was saying. But, Charlie, we haven't threatened you since you beat us in the War of Independence. I mean, we've been within reach of Nazi bombs. Our country has been physically threatened and indeed attacked physically. There were a scattering of bombs on the United States in the Second World War, but we don't have the same mentality as you. Charlie, can you understand what you look like in your country? You're a patriot, and I think that's the most terrific thing to be, and it is the most wonderful country, the United States. But can you begin to understand how bizarre and ghastly, to be honest, these attitudes look to us in Europe?
It may do, and by the way, small correction, you haven't threatened us since 1812, actually, but that's...
Thank you, Charlie, I take the point.
Small point. I take the point. 200 years ago, I think we're still in the anniversary year. Not that we've forgotten or anything. But there is a cultural difference, and just as we have to respect your culture over here, I think you have to respect our culture. And watching the coverage here, sometimes I think that the press in particular are trying to imprint or project their culture onto America. And we're not going to have a handgun ban. It's just not going to happen. It's not physically possible. Again, you can have a quicker chance of changing the laws of gravity. These are natural laws. And it's better to look at the wider picture and say, okay, what can we do? And it's a bit far-fetched to say, well, they're ghastly laws, or they're absurd, or we're violent. Or, some of these things we are, but we are also a free and sovereign nation, and that's what's important. I chewed out a poor producer this morning from Radio Scotland, BBC Scotland, when she said, our subject is, can the world pressure the United States into giving up its handguns? And I said, well, the world will do no such thing, whether it's Scotland or the United Nations, etc. We are a sovereign nation, and that's paramount to us.
Charlie Wolf, thank you very much.